Hi, wonderful AP Human Geography students. Thank you for tuning in again to our YouTube lecture. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the criticisms of the model, Rostow's model. And the first thing I want to show you, however, is a rural to urban shift in what he talks about happening here. Try and get this up so you can see it. The formula that Rostow uses in his model states that as countries urbanize and as people increasingly move into cities and industrialize, as the country industrializes, the family size will naturally go down and incomes will traditionally go up. So you're going from stage one, where you have a very large family, your traditional family, where everyone is needed to work and to create food for the family. And you see going down to stage two, your family size starts to shrink, but your economic income starts to climb. We get to stage three, and we see this is the shift that happens in rural to urban shift that we call happening. The family size is continuing to go down and income is going up. Stage four, we see a much more developed economy with more industry, and we find that the family size is shrinking until we get to, and you'll see this line is almost down to a very, very small family size, while the income line is shooting way up here. And we have higher income, we're in a consumer society, and we have small families. This is a post-industrial type of society here. Now, the criticisms of Rostow's model are many. Number one criticism that people usually come up with is that it's based on American and European history, and that it defines the American norm of high mass consumption as being integral to the economic development process of every industrialized society. So what we consider as normal high mass consumption has to be found in the development process of all industrialized countries. Now, Rostow's model number two criticism is it does not apply to the Asian and African countries. Events in African and Asian countries are not justified in any stage of his model. Criticism number three, according to Rostow, growth becomes automatic by the time it reaches the maturity stage. But other economists assert no growth can be automatic. There is always a need for push. And push meaning that there has to be some external stimulus or something to push that growth. Number four criticism is Rostow's thesis is biased towards the Western model of modernization. At the time of Rostow, the world's only mature economies were in the West, and no controlled or communist economies, command economies as we call them, were in the era of high mass consumption. The Model de-emphasizes the differences between sectors in capitalist versus communist societies, but it does seem to innately recognize that modern economies, modernization can be achieved in different ways in different types of economies. So you still can modernize in a communist economy, it just looks different. But number five criticism is the most disabling assumption that Rostow took, is of trying to fit economic progress into a linear system. Okay? As we saw before, he said you had to progress from stage one to stage 2, to stage 3, to stage 4. But in reality, this assumption is false because we have proof that many countries made false starts and then reached a degree of progress and change, but then slipped back. They may have gone from stage 2 to stage 3 and then come back. So we have proof of that. One situation that is proof is the case of contemporary Russia. They were a high mass consumption stage economy, and they went back to the country in transition because of the Cold War ending and geopolitical struggles. So Russia actually went back. The sixth, do we have six? Yes, the sixth criticism of Rostow's model is it only considered large countries that either had a large population like Japan or had natural resources available at just the right time in the history, such as coal in the northern European countries, or maybe they had a large land mass like Argentina has. But he has little to say, and really he just offers very little hope for small countries, such as Rwanda, that do not have these types of advantages. And lastly, the theory does not account for exceptions. For example, falling output in the USSR under the communist regime, or the corrupt failing government in Zimbabwe that reversed development advances. And increased globalization means that a country's growth rate does not lie solely in its own hands. And international competition and protectionism may prevent an economy from moving through the latter stages. So what is the relevance then of to Rostow's theory to developing countries? Can we even apply it? Well, Rostow's theory of development was based on the background of Western countries, and all countries are supposed to develop by going through these 5 stages, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in a linear fashion to fully develop. But as relevant as some parts of the theory might be, the theory does not apply largely to the developing countries because the different stages they are in may not align with the model. In fact, the model might be too simplistic for the complicated situations that these countries are in. They're unpredictable, they're ever-changing situations, and it's been argued that some countries have developed without even passing through the 5 stages in their order. And there are many instances where the stages overlap in a country's development path. Most of the African countries might still be stuck in stages 1 and 2, despite receiving huge jump starts in terms of foreign aid, foreign assistance from other countries. Why the model might only be partially applicable to the Russian setting is because it does not consider such factors as the degree of governance and the presence of strong institutional frameworks in a country. A big factor that influences developing countries is the presence of endemic corruption. What is endemic corruption? Endemic means deep-seated, ever-present. So corruption is a part of the fabric of the country's society. And probably the biggest reason that despite the Head Start attempts that these countries have received, they have still been unable to fully take off. Most, if not all, leaders of African countries are called kleptocrats, which the Cambridge Dictionary defines a kleptocrat as a leader who makes himself or herself rich and powerful by stealing from the people of the country. So this you can look at so many leaders in the African on the continent and see that they have enriched their own personal families and themselves at the expense of the people of the country. The lack of institutional frameworks in these countries also impedes the growth because it kills the incentive of private investors to put their money in the economy also. Institutions such as a strong banking system and access to foreign monetary and financial exchanges are needed. These are the kinds of institutions that investors need to see in order to invest in the countries. Almost all the developing countries have relied on foreign aid at one time or the other during their independent histories. And for some it has worked, but for the majority it has actually been a source of conflict once they become too dependent on the aid. Rostow did not foresee this when he developed his theory, and to that extent it would be difficult to apply to the developing countries. Also, controversially, it has been argued that most of the African countries went through a process of colonization. We call it the Great Scramble of Africa. And we had all of these European countries coming in, Great Britain, France, Portugal, Belgium, who am I forgetting? Germany, coming in and dividing up the continent. And during this time, they developed and retarded the foreign countries, something the Rostows model obviously doesn't consider. Now, besides, the events in most of the African countries cannot be aligned to any one of the stages of development, as they're unique to the continent's issues at the moment. And most of the countries are grappling with different issues, especially dealing with their colonial masters, with some even suggesting that the neo-colonialization effects, the new colonial effects, have taken a toll also in the country's development. And this is made worse by the lack of governance and leadership in these countries. This negatively affects development and contradicts with the model of growth because these factors are not included in Rostow's model. The harmful effects of globalization cannot be underestimated in the theory where most of these countries are competing with the developed countries on the same terms and in the same markets and platforms, despite their difference in development levels. And this creates a scenario in which a country is competing against global capitalism, which of course hurts the poor countries. Again, the theory does not look at a situation that development can be catapulted by elements like technology and globalization, and at the same time pull them backwards because of the unfair trading practices that are present. This, of course, is made possible through technology, but then these poor countries are still heavily agricultural and basic, and their level of industrialization is still very low. We have situations where most of the exports are in the form of raw materials, as the industrialization is yet to fully take root. And as a result, the prices at the international markets are not competitive to these countries as they export these cheap raw materials and import refined finished products at a high cost. So the effects of globalization are rampant and cannot be underestimated in the reason Rostow's theory is not really going to hold water for developed countries in Asia and in Africa, on the African continent. Thank you for paying attention. If you have any questions on this material, Feel free to post them on our message board so that my answers can be seen by everyone. Because remember, if you have a question about something, now's the time to clear it up before we move forward. And everyone else will probably, at least some of your fellow students will probably have the same question as well. So I hope this helps you to glimpse a little bit of a sort of a preview of economic geography as we move forward and study primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary sectors of our economy in economic geography. Thank you for your attention and take care and have a wonderful week.